All right, hello, Honors 110. So, to get going for today, the focus is going to be on the readings by Bossier from the Cactus Country memoir, collection of essays. There's a few different ways we could potentially look at that. So, to start out here, I wanted to start with just the author's note at the very beginning of the text. I think a lot of times we're tempted to just gloss over this sort of stuff, and I'll be the first to admit that I have done that in the past, but I think it often is worth giving it a look. And so I'm going to read, this is just, again, that short paragraph marked as author's note there right at the beginning of the book. It reads, "This work has been adapted from my life and is subject to the limitations of memory and perspective that make true stories so deeply human. In cases of conflicting accounts, I have often privileged my own version of events over other recollections. Some timelines have been purposely collapsed or integrated in the interest of cohesive narrative storytelling. In many instances, names and identifying details have been altered to protect the identities of the real people I grew up with." Part of why I wanted to address this is I think there's a misconception around creative nonfiction or autobiographies or any kind of work along these lines that it's literally completely the truth. And unless someone has been carrying a camera around with them the entire time or been recording all of their conversations throughout their life, that's basically never the case, right? So people are relying on memory, which inherently isn't 100% reliable. And when we get things like dialogue, people talking to each other in a text like this, the implication is that this isn't literally what was said completely, but rather it's capturing the spirit of what was said, paraphrased as best the author can kind of remember, and sometimes modified slightly to kind of fit the narrative that they're telling. So this whole conversation around, collapsing timelines and whatnot, I know sometimes that can feel a little bit dishonest, frankly, from a text because it's, a true story, but at the same time, we're taking some liberties there. But this is just a fundamental part of kind of the art of creative nonfiction, which I imagine we'll talk about here and there as the course goes on. But to carry on here, I want to start in on the section called The Beginning, that if you just turn the page, it's there. So that reads, "The boy poses for a photograph in an Airstream trailer, the scruffy family dog wrapped around his shoulders like a feather boa. His short blonde hair is tousled, uncombed, his cheeks and the bridge of his nose marked red from a long afternoon spent playing, shouting, fighting with other boys under the harsh desert sunlight. Dust and sweat stain his wrinkled t-shirt, the pale skin on his neck and arms. He and the dog look directly into the camera's eye, their frozen gaze stretching like the night outside, the trailer they stand in, forever waiting for the shutter to click. Many people have seen the photos from my childhood in Cactus Country, the trailer park I grew up in, have asked where they were taken and whether the boy pictured is my brother. They are surprised when they learn the truth. It was that boy is me." So I wanted to establish this about the text, and particularly one of the interesting elements of this is we are talking about an author who now identifies as female, was born biologically female, in her youth identified as a boy. And so pronouns get especially messy here. I know it can be a hot button issue in general here, but whether we refer to this person as she, he, they, is a little bit of a moving target depending on the different points that we're kind of recollecting here. And so you'll probably even hear me use those terms a little bit interchangeably depending on where we are in the text. Full disclosure, I know the author, we're not super close or anything, but we've met a number of times in real life. And I've met this person only as a female presenting person. And so she comes very naturally to me. And yet in the text, I would want to be sensitive to the identity, being put forth as male. So in any event, I'm curious about kind of, those first two paragraphs from the beginning section on page 1 that I read, and just sort of what sense we make of that as a beginning point for this book, paired with the photograph that we see on the opposite page there. Carrying forward from there, on page 2, let me read the very first paragraph from that. "So on the day this picture was taken in the Airstream, the boy I was had never heard the word transgender. Didn't know to look it up in Dad's tattered dictionary as he had with other words like boy, man, male, sex, and change. He didn't have the language then to talk about how it felt to be raised in a gender at odds with the way he saw himself. what it was like to pray to a God he didn't believe in, that tomorrow he might wake in a different body, one more like the bodies of the other boys he spent his days with in the desert, smashing beetles and chasing freight trains. And so part of what I think is interesting here is just this concept of not having the language for something, right? We're talking about a pre-internet age that Bossier is depicting here. And so, kind of not being able to kind of put your finger on an identity even in a way that we would from a modern perspective. Carrying on from there, though, so the next paragraph, I believe it is, we're talking about kind of setting a little bit more intentionally here. So that paragraph reads, "The story of the boy I was, of the person I am, is inextricably linked to the desert surrounding Cactus Country, and to the hard masculinity, stoicism, and camaraderie of the boys and men I knew in those years who regarded me as one of their own." And this is actually, I want to leave as sort of an open-ended question that you can feel free to address in the discussion here. But just some questions of how identity is sort of tied to place, right? The place where you were brought up, the place where you live. I think these factors do influence a little bit of who we ultimately become. And so I'm just curious what you all think about that, maybe how you've seen that in your own experience, either very personally or just with people you've interacted with in different ways. Carrying forward here in the text itself, I'm going to head to page 4 and the middle paragraph there. For those who have electronic versions of text, I'll try to kind of loop you in where I can on these things. It's a little bit trickier, but this is right before we transition to the Desert Boy section, kind of in that second to last paragraph of the beginning section. So it reads, "The girl in the story is unhappy, except when she isn't. The boy wishes his body were different, except when he doesn't. The child searches for the place they belong, except when they feel content exactly where they are. There are many places like this I could start, but I'd be lying if I said how it begins is really all that important. Only that no matter how many ways I try to tell it straight, the story of my childhood always seems to wander." And I bring this up in large part just because I sort of feel like this is actually a theme for this class overall, that what we'll think about is just sort of the wandering kind of nature of things, the way that certain ideas, we can't kind of extract them from others, that everything is sort of a moving target. There are very few constants. And so let's just keep that point in mind as we kind of progress through the session here. But let me carry on further here. So let's see, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is, let's go to page 11 here in the text. So let's see. And this is the last paragraph. This was actually the last section of the day 1 chapter of the book here. So it reads, "That next morning, I woke up early to buy a pocket knife at the Cactus Country Park store. The green saguaro cactus painted on its handle faded quickly in my sweaty hands as I practiced flicking the knife open with the snap of my wrist and pointing at an imaginary set of eyes, as the boy had done to me. I practiced until I could do this without looking, expecting another Western-style showdown when the boy and I saw each other next. This time, I'd be ready to pass his test. But by that afternoon, the boy's trailer was long gone. The only evidence he'd ever been in the park, a few broken toys scattered in the dirt under a picnic table." And so I'm only reading this paragraph. Obviously, you have to kind of read the preceding section to make sense of that around her sort of confrontation with this young boy who threatens to cut her previously in the text. And so I am kind of curious just about our read of this in terms of what this sort of says around masculinity and kind of how we kind of conceive of overall what's going on in this text, and how at least Bossier kind of renders gender and thinking about the things they have to do to kind of measure up in this sort of context. And so with that, another kind of piece of that is just sort of the sense of sort of impermanence of things being sort of transient. This person who looks like they might become a major character in this book, a major figure in Bossier's life, is kind of gone before the connection is even really made there. But okay, carrying on here, I'm going to go to page 17. So here, I'm looking at the first full printed paragraph here. So it reads, "In the months after we bought the Airstream, Dad filled my imagination with fantastic visions about everything our move to Arizona would entail. Our new home in the Southwest would be the beginning of a real adventure, where he said I would have the chance to reinvent myself onto whoever I wanted to be. He promised me a dog and bought home a small wild-haired animal who would accompany us on the journey into our new lives. We named her Tucson after the place we were headed, and in the weeks leading up to the move, I spent a lot of time in front of the bathroom mirror thinking hard about the person I wanted to become. And so I'm curious just about this notion of, kind of reinventing oneself and what we sort of make of that. Is it even possible to do that? What do we think of Bossier's kind of attempts to make that happen there? The last note I'm going to kind of leave you off on, and I'll also leave this an opportunity for the discussion as well, is backing way up in the text to page 3 here, in the third paragraph, where it reads, if there's a defining moment of my childhood, it's probably this one. My tiny hands still covered in dirt, waving indignantly in the air, insisting that my parents had told the story all wrong, that I hadn't been lost at all, that I was right here where I intended to be. And so for this part, it's less a question about the text and more sort of a prompt for your reflection. And so I want to challenge you this notion of if there is a defining element of my childhood. And so I'm going to pose that as kind of a prompt to you all. Can you think of a defining moment of your childhood? A moment that kind of says who you are in some sort of meaningful way, or that you look back on as kind of an important point that kind of influenced who you'd become? Anything along those lines. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. There's a ton more in the text. Obviously, I only kind of scraped the surface of sections that are really worth kind of digging into and reading deeper into. So with that, I welcome you to respond to any of the given questions and passages that I introduced here, or also to kind of take it in your own directions in the discussion. If there's other parts that really drew your attention, you were interested in, please feel free to bring those parts to the class's attention as well. And also to ask questions. If there's parts that didn't make sense to you or this brought up other kind of deeper concerns to you, I think that can always be really interesting points for discussion as well. All right, thank you all very much for watching. I look forward to the discussion.